Alright, so this clip of the former Chinese foreign minister owning a Canadian journalist has gotten way out of hand. To the point that it's even listed on the Chinese government website as a great example of pro-China wolf warrior diplomacy. Now, what exactly is wolf warrior diplomacy? It's this type of diplomacy founded under Xi that basically encourages Chinese diplomats to be very combative and aggressive, especially against anything that's even slightly against the Chinese government.
That had earned the nickname wolf warrior diplomacy.
American media claimed, "Here comes a Chinese wolf warrior. Now I'm back as the foreign minister."
Wolf warrior diplomacy has been an absolute failure.
Give me a chance to finish my answer.
Please, go ahead.
You have to show me a single, we are not talking about the US, but give me one specific instance of police brutality.
Wang Yi here is maybe the best there is at it. He's mastered the art of dodging and deflecting questions, boasting China's accomplishments, and then putting down Canada and the US. So much so, he's even got promoted from foreign minister to director of foreign affairs. Okay, so let's break down one of the instances that I believe to be a prime example of his wolf warrior diplomacy. This is Ottawa 2016, and of course these concerns on China weren't raised by a major Canadian news organization, but by Amanda Connolly of iPolitics, a small online news website that actually had the balls to do it.
There are no shortage of concerns about China's treatment of human rights advocates such as the Hong Kong Booksellers and its detention of the Garratts, not to mention the destabilizing effects of its territorial ambitions in the South China Sea.
Okay, so her question raises three really good points. But before we get to that, let's look at the face of our former foreign minister, Stéphane Dion. As soon as the word human rights is said, his head drops immediately. Tries to act like this isn't happening, pretends to look at a piece of paper, and so on. Throughout the entire process, he stays dead quiet. Buddy, you should have been the one asking these questions in the first place, or backing her up after she asked these questions to you. So Hong Kong used to have freedom of speech. In 2015, some booksellers exercised this right and sold books that kind of made the Chinese government look bad, personal lives of politicians, etc. China's response to this was kidnapping these individuals from Hong Kong, bringing them to the mainland, forcing confessions, and giving them jail time. This was one of the first big erosions of Hong Kong rights up until 2019.
He sent me 2 messages on Skype telling me to keep quiet. As his daughter, I could tell that he sent these under duress.
The second point she raises is the detention of 2 Garratts. So long before we had the whole 2 Michaels kidnapping political prisoners debacle, we had a similar situation play out a few years ago. There's a Chinese spy in Vancouver stealing intellectual property from Washington State. This is why the Chinese fighters look so similar to the American ones. It's all copied. So basically, the US tipped us off and we arrested this spy. You know, and it's not like this guy wasn't guilty. The evidence was overwhelming. He actually confessed. The Global Times, essentially the Chinese government's mouthpiece disguised as a newspaper, praised his work as a patriot on this. So arresting him and extraditing him shouldn't have been that controversial. They, in retaliation, kidnapped 2 Canadian missionaries running a coffee shop in northern China. 2 people that hadn't done anything to anyone. They were separated from each other and dragged through hell for years just because we caught one of their spies.
Not to mention the destabilizing effects of its territorial ambitions in the South China Sea. Given these concerns, why is Canada pursuing closer ties with China? How do you plan to use that relationship to improve human rights and security in the region?
Third and final point, China believes they own all of the South China Sea. Despite the name, they only own a fraction of it by international law. For example, they think they own the water off the coast of the capital Brunei instead of Brunei. This would be like America claiming the fishing water off the coast of Brazil, or India claiming the Indian Ocean all the way down to Australia. To bolster this 9- claim, or I guess 10- claim as of this week, they've been building artificial islands in the South China Sea with military bases on them to try to claim territory. And they've also done basically a propaganda campaign, even in Hollywood. They had the kids' film Abominable have a 9- line on a map. And even Barbie, to secure a release in China, they required the poster have that 9- line as well. That's why Barbie was banned in Vietnam. So those were her 3 points, and in hindsight, it being 7 years later, these were 3 very valid concerns in 2016. They were all precursors for things that actually happened. For example, the Hong Kong Booksellers was a precursor to the 2019 Hong Kong protests. The kidnapping of the 2 Garratts was a precursor for the kidnapping of 2 Michaels, and the hostility in the South China Sea continues to this year. In 2023, they're still expanding. So these were 3 very valid points to get ahead of in 2016. This question was asked to our foreign minister, but Wang Yi, their foreign minister, insisted on responding. Only he really didn't respond to a word that she said.
I want to make a response to the questions asked by this journalist about China. I have to say that your question is full of prejudice and against China and arrogance, where I don't know where that come from.
Okay, so first thing as always, they start with prejudice. They know us Canadians are very sensitive about race and racial issues, so they'll always start with that right off the bat to shut us up. It doesn't matter that they have 2 million ethnic minorities in concentration camps and they're erasing a culture. That doesn't matter. We're the racists for even asking about Hong Kong. So he talks for 45 seconds straight, leaving his translator to pick up the slack, and miraculously she does.
I have to ask whether you understand China. Have you been to China? Do you know that China has lifted more than 600 million people out of poverty?
First point, China has lifted over 600 million people out of poverty. It'd be a lot more accurate to say that when the Chinese government stopped repressing its own people with movements like the Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution, and they actually allowed the Chinese people to own property, run a business, other economic freedoms, that the Chinese people pulled themselves out of poverty.
And do you know that China is now the second largest economy in the world from a very low foundation?
This one kills me. So China is the second largest economy in the world. They boast about this like it's some kind of response to what she said. How is it relevant? And the audacity here to brag about your number 2 economy while also labeling yourself as a developing nation and receiving tens of millions of dollars in aid from Canada each year. In 2020 alone, Canada donated $14.2 million in aid to China. Powerful number 2 economy or a developing nation that needs aid from Canada? You can't have both. Pick one.
Do you think development is possible for China without protection of human rights? And do you know that China has written protection and promotion of human rights into our constitution?
Okay, so because they wrote human rights in their constitution means that they never break human rights. You know what else is in their constitution? Freedom of speech, which they obviously don't have in mainland China. Just this year, a famous Chinese comedian, someone you think might be untouchable, he made a very innocent joke referencing a military slogan talking about dogs chasing a squirrel. That got him arrested. That's literally how low the bar is at the moment. So them having human rights or freedom of speech in their constitution is a complete joke. And Trudeau even naively tried to secure a trade deal with some human rights conditions in there, and they basically laughed in his face.
Other people don't know better than the Chinese people about the human rights condition in China.
I actually agree with this line. Only issue in 2023 is that most Chinese people can't say anything about human rights without going to prison. When they could speak about it, they did. 1 in 10 people in Beijing came out to support the 1989 protests. Hundreds of thousands of university students across the country. Those who haven't drank the Kool-Aid from their government want to speak out. They're just afraid of the consequences if they do.
So I would like to suggest to you that please don't ask questions in such an irresponsible manner. And we welcome goodwill suggestions, but we reject groundless or unwarranted accusations.
Great, so absolutely nothing she said was addressed. He gave his little prepared speech that hit all the beats. You're a racist, you don't know China. He boasted about the economy, lied about the human rights issues in China, and then just capped it off with a "you suck" for even asking in the first place. Even though she didn't even ask it to him, and none of her points were even addressed. What bothers me the most about this is really no one pointed out any of these things. Stéphane Dion, our foreign minister, didn't say anything. He just looked visibly uncomfortable. Anyone would even ask a difficult question about China. The YouTube comments all seem to focus on the translator for some reason, and the Canadian news organizations seem to focus more on the confrontation than the actual points of either party. There was one Chinese-Canadian journalist that wrote negatively about Wang's behavior in a Chinese newspaper, and he just basically got hurled death threats. And then his own editor said, people just don't want to see your name in the paper anymore. That's the consequences people had for even writing something slightly negative about this. And I think another thing Wang Yi was saying was actually correct. Canadians don't know China very well. And we especially don't know this level of aggressive diplomacy very well. Especially if he's going to bolster about a country we don't know about, and our politicians, who should know geopolitics, are allowing it. the average Canadian might take his words at face value. I think it's about time that we do learn their politics and their diplomacy, and we figure out a way to combat it. Because you can criticize this way of diplomacy all you want and say, as many Canadians do, and go, harumph, that's not how we do politics, blah, blah, blah. But this approach worked on us very well. And I'm not saying that we should copy it. We just need to find a way to combat it.